You're wondering what the difference between the for loop and for each is in Google Apps Script? I'm Greco from Saperis, and in this video I'll show you the difference between for and for each and which you should be using. To demonstrate the difference between the for and the for each looping over data with Google Apps Script, I have this simple little Google Sheets document. We have two separate columns and a couple of rows, and what we want to do is use each of these two possibilities to loop over these rows and just log them out to the logger, just to show you how it works. So I already fired up my script editor over here, and I created my demo function, and I got all the data we want. By the way, I have a video on how you can get the data from a spreadsheet, so if you're interested in that, I'm going to link a card above right about now, so have a look at that. Good, let's start out with the for loop. The for loop is the traditional way of looping over data in a lot, if maybe not even almost all programming languages. It's a bit difficult to know because there are, according to the different sources out there, there are more than 2,000 programming languages. So I believe there's not one single person who can name all the programming languages that were ever created. But let's say like C#, JavaScript, of course, those are programming languages where you traditionally have the for loop, and this is was the go-to loop for many years in JavaScript. And you're probably thinking, wait a minute, I came to this video because I'm looking into Google Apps Script. What's she talking about JavaScript? Well, the thing is, Google Apps Script is based upon JavaScript. So it's pretty much the most important part of JavaScript, and then kind of like packaged with a lot of Google objects. I have several videos concerning that Google Apps Script, so go ahead and have a look at that. Those videos if you want to deep dive a bit deeper into this. So what I'm showing you today is valid Google Apps Script, but it's also valid JavaScript. So if you landed on this video because you're looking into for versus for each in JavaScript, you can stay here because what you'll learn is exactly the same in JavaScript as well. Good, so let's start out with our for loop. And what I'll typically do is I'll call this variable index. Mostly people just write I, let I or var I. It does exactly the same thing. I just believe that the more abbreviations you use for your variable names, the more difficult it is to actually understand and remember what you're writing, and also especially for beginners to follow. That's why I like to give proper variable names, and that's why this is called index. And then we're saying index as long as it's lesser than data.length. I want my index to increment by 1. And I said we're just going to log out our data, and it's data and index. There you go. Let's save this. Let's run our demo function and see what happens. So I also have a separate video on how to work or how to get the for loop working. Please do check that out because I won't go into details now. But what I do want to view are the logs. There you go. So we're just printing out or logging out every single row like so. Good. So that's the for loop. Now on to for each. Now, for each is not considered a loop as for is. I mean, we do talk about the for each loop, but it's actually a method that is on the array prototype. So it's a method that we can use on every single array in Google Apps Script, or as a matter of fact, JavaScript. So let's log out our data using the for each method, and that's what we have to call it on our array. So we write it like so, for, and here we have our auto completion, and now we need to give the for each method a callback. So we need to define this function that will be called on every item in our array, And we do this like so. I'm just going to name this our item on each loop row, but you can name it whatever you want to. Also, for the for each method, I have a video on that as well. So do check that out if you want to find out how exactly this works. And then we are not going to log out data, but we are going to log out row. And I want us to see the difference when are the rows being logged out with the for and for each. So what I'm going to do now, for each loop, like so, row. There you go. Let's save this and let's run it. And we should see both methods of logging out these separate rows. The first will be the for, the second will be our for each, and that will recognize because of the string that will be preceding the data from those rows. Here you go. So this is the data we got from our for loop, and this is the for each loop, aka method, that we are running on our array. So the question now is, which should you use, the for loop or the for each method on your array? The answer is, it's not that easy because it depends on you. Both are more or less equal. There are some slight technical differences under the hood, but in, I would say, 99% of the cases, it doesn't matter which you use from a technical perspective. I personally would recommend you use the for each method on arrays because of two reasons. First of all, I mean, look at this. Isn't the for each just easier to read? Especially if you think about that, when we're dealing with data from a Google Sheets document, we usually have a two-dimensional array, which we have to loop over. So here we just looping over one array, but if we wanted to also handle the information in the column separately, we would have to create a second for loop. And it just gets a bit messier when you do it with the for loop. I mean, it's absolutely valid, of course. That was the standard, the golden standard for many, many years. But with the for each, it's just easier to have a second for each within your first for each. So that's the first reason. It's easier to read. The second reason is that the for each method works on every array. And setting it up makes sure that you don't make mistakes. What do I mean by that? Well, here in the for loop, I also have to think a bit. So I have to think of my condition. And if I do something like this, well, it's still going to work, but I'm messing up my for loop because it's going to loop too far. And that, depending on whatever automation script you're writing, that could be a huge error and, I don't know, cause you to lose a lot of money. So if you have your data from a Google Sheets document and you're looping over it, I would advise you to use the for each method. I have a couple of other videos covering Google Apps Script, very beginner friendly. Check that out, and please go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel because I regularly publish videos about Google Apps Script and I wouldn't want you to miss out on those.